Hey everyone, it's the host of All Across America, Marco Vig, jumping in for a few seconds before the show to thank y'all for listening, to let you know that I want to hear from you. Tell me what you like about the show, and send me your suggestions too. Follow us on Instagram at AllXAmerica, or visit the website, allacrossamerica.net, and you can use our contact page there. If you want to support us, we're on Patreon at patreon.com/allacrossamerica. Try to respond personally to everyone who reaches out, so say hello. All right, on with the show. Podcasting from Portland East to Portland West, from Big Pine Key to Pacific Beach, and from San Juan to Guam, this is All Across America. Maybe, Jim, you could just tell us kind of about your career and who you've written for, and we'll start from there.
Sure. Well, I am a car journalist. I've been an automotive journalist for probably about 25, 30 years, I'm
Wow,
embarrassed to
okay.
say. And that grew out of my lifelong car enthusiasm. I've worked for Consumer Reports for a long time. I was an in-house staff writer, and
Okay.
then I worked for Car and Driver for a while.
Okay,
I have freelanced for just about everybody from Autoblog to Automobile Magazine
right.
to various newspapers. And nowadays, I work for Cars.com and U.S. News as a
Oh, wow.
regular contributor, and
Okay.
I've got an interest in classic cars, so I do some stuff for Haggerty on the side as well.
Excellent. All right. And so are you actively testing cars as we speak?
Sure, yeah, I've got a Honda Civic Si this week, which I'm
Okay.
rather fond of.
All right. All right. So, I mean, do you have, like a car carrier coming to your house like a couple times a month, dropping off new cars? How does that work?
No, nothing quite so exotic, and nothing with quite so many cars. That might be a
Yeah.
little overwhelming. No, the way it works is, and this is true of a lot of automotive journalists, there are companies that are contracted by the car companies to, and these individuals or these organizations pick up and deliver the cars to our places of work or our homes, including
Okay.
myself.
Right.
And
Right.
so once a week, there's a car swap and on to something else.
Oh, okay. All right. So simple enough. I was wondering about the neighbors. If every week there'd be a big car carrier in the neighborhood.
It's good to let the neighbors know if you're new to an area that you are not in fact a drug dealer or doing something else illicit. That cars with California plates showing up in your driveway every week are just part of the job.
Right, right. Well, wanted to start back from the beginning, I guess, on pickup trucks, and I'm looking myself, and I saw there was a Ford Runabout in 1925. There was something called the Ford Model TT in 1917. What's considered the first American pickup truck?
Well, you just nailed it. Henry Ford is generally regarded as being the father of the pickup truck, among other things. And the Model T Ford is kind of where the whole concept started. A lot of farmers purchased those because, of course, they were affordable in a mass
Right.
market vehicle, and their durability and simplicity made it kind of a no-brainer for farmers to start using them not just as work vehicles and hauling bales of hay, but actually literally working in the fields and pulling implements with them. And so a lot of those were kind of basically homemade, rebodied. People would put a box on the back of them, and not wanting to miss an opportunity, various entrepreneurs, including Mr. Ford, saw the market. So there were a lot of
Right.
conversions being made by dealers in the early days, and then
Okay.
finally the Ford Model T pickup was the first real one to come out of Detroit.
Okay. So the dealership. It sounds like the Ford company was getting recommendations, feedback from dealers to say that we're now retrofitting the Model T. You ever think of just outright making one? Is that kind of how it happened? It's kind of consumer driven.
That's kind of the way it evolved. Whether there was the, the dealers approaching Ford saying that hey, we need one of these, or that they were simply doing it.
Yeah.
One way or the other, wind of it got up to Henry Ford, who rumor, as legend story has it, actually used one himself on his
Okay.
own farm,
Oh,
and
wow.
that
Okay.
kind of helped
Right.
spark things as well.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, could that be considered the first American pickup truck? Whatever pickup truck Henry Ford used himself, is that in existence? Do we know where it is?
Oh gosh, I don't know. There might be one at the Ford Museum in
Right.
Dearborn. There
Right.
probably is something. There's certainly a Model T pickup truck there.
Right.
Whether there's one actually used by Henry himself, I don't know.
Right.
But
Right.
that's kind of what got the whole thing going. And there are probably people who would have another opinion on it, but that is what I have read and seen in my research.
Right, right. I see that in Europe, Daimler had created a form of a pickup truck back in the, I don't know, 1896, I have in my notes. Is that true? And it seems like obviously Americans have taken the pickup truck concept far and away beyond what the Europeans have done. And so I guess my follow up would be, what makes the pickup so much an iconic symbol of America?
Yeah, well, regardless of what may have come out of Daimler, yeah, certainly the American public and the manufacturers took the ball and ran with it,
Right,
to the point where pickups, as I'm sure you know, um, just exploded in popularity and now outsell passenger cars in the US and have for quite some time. Um, I think it's a combination of factors. I think that the agricultural community had a lot to do with it. With all the space in
right.
America, there were
True.
larger fields and larger farms to work, thus
Right.
making the idea of mechanizing the agricultural landscape that much more of a need or more efficient here than in Europe,
Right.
probably, where things were a little more compact.
Fair enough.
Cheaper fuel, had something to do with it for sure. And the largely rural economy that this country was founded on, really, for a
Right.
very long time, and still is, obviously, but perhaps not to the degree that the small farm.
Sure. Sure.
They're less prevalent than they were in the day. But I think all of those things had something to do with it.
And when did, I mean, you had mentioned that pickup trucks are outsell passenger cars in the United States. When did it go? And clearly, all those pickup trucks being sold are not being used for farm or for construction. When did the
You know,
pickup truck go from the a farm utility vehicle to become the typical everyday American car?
Sure. As it evolved over the course of time. The again, as the economy grew and we became more of a perhaps two vehicle society and stuff, that had something to do with it.
Right.
But again, the manufacturers saw the acceptance of the pickup truck and the success of the pickup truck and started catering to a buyer wanting more personalized pickup or maybe one with more car like features.
Right.
This initially started in, say, the 50s, is
Okay.
when really we saw the first pickups, specifically the Chevy Cameo and the GMC counterpart,
Okay.
um, for it. Those were the first pickup trucks that had sort of smooth bed sides on the rear rather than the exposed fenders.
Okay.
And along with that, they added a lot more features like, more upholstery in the cabin, a headliner, power accessories,
Right.
power steering, that kind of stuff, radios, even more chrome trim, white wall tires. They just kind of cosmetically and functionally started dressing trucks up in the 50s. And then from there into the 60s, again, more factory trim packages, and more upscale car like features that
Right.
people were demanding. And it was probably, the 70s, 80s is where things really started to develop. And for something like 3 decades now, the F 150, the Ford F 150, has been not just the biggest selling pickup in the country, but the biggest selling vehicle, period.
Where's the F-150 made?
And that Oh, it's made in the States in a number of different plants,
Okay.
and
Yeah.
I believe it's made overseas as well. I mean, they,
Okay.
they just make crazy numbers of them. And a lot of them do go still to commercial use. That
Right.
is a factor. But,
Right.
the advent of the four-door pickup was another thing that helped make it more of a family-friendly
Right.
thing. We started seeing a few of those in the 60s and
Okay.
70s, but again, an evolutionary thing to the point where now there are more pickups, way more pickups sold with four doors than with two. And in fact,
Okay.
some of the manufacturers don't even make a two-door pickup anymore.
Really? Wow. Okay, and we're talking 4 full doors? I'm thinking of an older
Yeah.
model of the Tundra where you have to open the passenger door in order to open a smaller, almost compartmentalized door. We're talking 4 full doors.
We do have a couple of the manufacturers. I know Ram in particular, has a cab that has a smaller rear door, and then
Okay.
there's one with a larger rear door.
Gotcha.
You,
Okay.
you still get the sort of extended cab, uh, two or either two door with a back seat or four door with a smaller back seat. There are still some of those, but the great majority of them are now just full on four door
Right.
vehicles that
Okay.
are more friendly for families in addition to work crews. More people end up using the front of the truck than the bed on a daily basis, although the bed is handy to have.
Right. Right.
And I think a lot of it has to do with, frankly, the look of a truck. People like
Yeah,
the
yeah.
feel, the look, they like the imagery, the romance. For sociability, there's that built-in picnic table at the back too.
Right,
Just drop the
exactly. Yeah,
tailgate and
that's
you've
right.
got a surface
Right, right. Well, I mean, that's
for your
exactly
beverage
where
or sandwich.
is that where football tailgating came from? I mean, do you refer to a car's trunk as a tailgate, or is it really the pickup truck?
Well, I mean, you used to no, not a trunk so much. In the days of the station wagon, that was regarded as a tailgate,
Right.
but I think it has more to do with pickups than anything.
Yep, yep.
And
And
we certainly see plenty of them at football stadiums on a Sunday afternoon
that's for sure. You had touched on
used
this.
in just that fashion.
You had touched on the 60s and 70s, and for me there's nothing, at least in the car world, that screams more 1970s than the Chevy El Camino, the Ford counterpart, the Ranchero.
The
There was
Ranchero.
the Caballero. Can you talk some about those? And I mean, they are iconic for that era. I mean, I'm an El Camino fan myself.
Sure. The cowboy Cadillac, as they have sometimes been called,
The Cowboy Cadillac.
combining more car-like feature. Yes, and with all due respect to the cowboys out there, again, just taking it that much closer to combining the benefits, the ride and handling of a car
Right.
with the truck's practicality. That whole trend started actually in the late 50s when
Okay.
both Ford and Chevrolet introduced the Ranchero and El Camino respectively,
Yeah.
based on their full-size sedan designs.
Oh wow. Okay.
The Ford first came out in 57, and then the El Camino came out for the 59 model year. And again, they were both just full size cars, essentially, with chopped off behind the two doors, the front doors
Right.
of the two door sedan models, and then with a bed in the back. And those remain popular right through the 60s, as you say. For people who it was a style statement, I guess, and more again comfort car like, lower height
Right.
than the truck. Perhaps without the capability, quite so much capability, but hugely popular. Even in the 60s, there were muscle car versions of those. The
Right.
Chevy El Camino had an SS 396,
Okay.
and Ford was putting 429s in the Ranchero. So for people doing their trucking in a big hurry, I guess those were appealing.
And today is are the chassis very separate from, talk about the El Camino that was based on a sedan. At what point did the chassis become completely separate from car chassis, or is that still the case for certain models? I drove an S10, which was, I guess, the Ford Bronco, which was, basically the chopped off version of the Bronco. Is that still the case for some models?
Well, certainly for the full size pickups, those are all what are called body on frame
Okay,
designs.
right,
Because a separate frame is ultimately going to be more not rigid, but more capable of carrying loads and pulling trailers and just doing the work job.
right,
So all of the full size trucks are based on a full frame design, whereas cars have increasingly over the past 20 or 30 years gone from having separate frames to being what's called a unibody design, which
Okay.
is lighter and can be more rigid, but just doesn't have the work capability. So most mid-sized and smaller SUVs are all a unibody design, and there have been some light use pickups, smaller ones like the Dodge Rampage from I guess it was the 80s, and some trucks like that, and even some newer trucks like the Ford Maverick that just came out. Now we're
Okay.
seeing a trend back to smaller trucks.
Right.
That's a unibody.
And so you said the Maverick had come out, and that leads me to, you look at the European and Asian cars, and they haven't had much of a footprint, particularly not in Europe. But Toyota has done terrific in terms of the Tundra and the Tacoma. Can you talk a little bit about those models?
Sure, sure. Toyota. I mean, as much as there's been a need for pickups in the U.S., pickups have become popular worldwide, and the
Yeah,
Toyota Tacoma, in one form or another, is hugely popular all over the world.
really. Okay,
That's a smaller pickup.
right.
It's technically called a mid-size pickup these days in the U.S. by most of
Okay,
the car magazines and such, but it's an alternative to the full size pickup. We first saw the Nissan or Datsun at the time in the late 50s. Datsun and Toyota were the first to bring out sort of mini pickups in the US, as they were
okay,
called. And again, those were just scaled down four-cylinder models that got better fuel economy and were arguably perhaps more fun to drive.
yeah,
That trend started, like so many automotive trends and fashion trends, in California,
right.
and kind of took a foothold there, and then ended up spreading all over the country. And obviously, both Nissan and Toyota still sell tons of the smaller
Right.
models.
What and you had mentioned, California, and they often say, as California goes, so does the nation, given its gigantic consumer footprint.
Sure.
It's 50 plus million people, and that's, particularly the case for vehicles and vehicle emission standards and fuel efficiency. Where do you see that going? I mean, here we are in April of 2022. We've had some of the highest gas prices ever. Will that affect the car market, the truck market long term? Where do you see that going?
That is a hard one to say. The consumers have very short memories at the end of the day, or car buyers certainly do.
Right.
In the early 2000s, we saw, uh, another spike in gas prices. I can remember prices in the $4 and $5 range. I think
Right.
most of us can, or a lot of us can. And at that time, suddenly everybody was buying hybrids and everybody was downsizing, and you
Right.
could get a huge honking SUV for peanuts
Yeah.
because everybody was diving out of them. And then as and sales of small economical cars dramatically increased. But as soon as gas prices started coming down, that reversed again. And then
Right.
for the past, close to 20 years, it seems that more and more people have been buying larger and larger pickups and
Right.
SUVs, and they've been hugely popular.
Yeah.
Um, with this spike, who knows what's going to happen or how quickly? But obviously, with Ford having introduced, a hybrid version of the F-150 and an electric one, and other startups like Tesla and Rivian looking at electric pickup
Right.
trucks, there is probably going to be a certain amount of that. We certainly are already seeing fewer V8 engines and more six cylinders,
Okay.
even in full size pickup trucks, and
Wow.
turbocharging to be more fuel efficient.
Okay.
Even before this spike, I would think that this will help accelerate that trend,
Right.
those trends going forward. especially since we've already, very gradually been seeing an increase in electric vehicles. That's kind of the way it's going to go over the course of time. How quickly, who knows?
Yeah.
We've got a lot of infrastructure to build yet, and
Right.
consumer acceptance is increasing slowly over time.
Right.
But so far, even with huge gas prices, it doesn't seem like it's doing much to slow anybody down from driving a whole lot.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I did just watching the Super Bowl. It felt like every other commercial was for an electric vehicle, so that was nice to see that we're taking American innovation and energy independence to the next level. But I guess it will be contingent upon consumer sentiment. But hopefully, things will move forward. And is it the Lightning, which is the all electric F-150 model?
Yes, yes. And I mean, ultimately, oil is a finite resource. At some
Yeah.
point or another, we're going to have to wean ourselves off of it. I
Right.
think for mass consumer acceptance, there's going to be the biggest resistance to electric vehicles appears to be range concerns and
Right.
infrastructure concerns.
Right.
There are still not enough charging places, charging locations, and the charging process itself needs to be faster. When you can
Right.
fill up a gas car in, a few
5 minutes.
minutes, even
Yeah.
with 20 gallons, people want to be able to do that with an electric. When you have a 500-mile cruising range or more than 500-mile cruising range with a gasoline truck, and the best of the electrics at this point are around 300,
300. Right.
that's going to be a factor too. But again, all of that is developing very quickly.
Yeah.
And it has been interesting to see how even traditional truck buyers are accepting hybrids and six cylinders and
Right.
various other developments, that
Let
people
me.
have tremendous loyalty to their trucks and to their
Yes.
brands.
Yeah.
And it's not exactly the most cutting edge necessarily, or the most, the buyers are perhaps not the earliest adopters of new technologies and such, but
Fair
so to
enough.
see that kind of change happening in the pickup truck world
Right.
is pretty seismic.
Yeah. Sure is. Tell me about the difference. You had talked briefly about V6s versus the V8s. A modern V6 engine. How does it stack up versus an older V8 engine?
Well, I'll use a personal example. I just had before the Honda that I'm driving this week. I was in a Ford Raptor pickup truck, an
Okay.
F-150 Raptor, which is
Okay.
kind of a high performance desert racing derived type pickup truck with just tremendously capable, tremendously quick. The Raptor used to have a V8. Now it's got a turbocharged V6,
Okay.
and it is certainly plenty quick enough for most people's needs.
Right.
And I was getting about 16.2 mpg with it, doing a lot of highway driving at 70 miles an hour and around town, a combination of things.
Right.
Now, 16.2 is certainly not, 40 or 50 miles per gallon, but you got to keep in mind that that's double at least what pickup trucks used to get not all that long
Right.
ago.
Right.
And some V8 pickup trucks are still EPA rated in the low teens,
Okay. Yeah.
but with a vehicle that size, every 1 mpg that you're able to increase it makes a big difference at the
Sure.
pump.
Sure.
Well, look at the Toyota Tundra again as an example. The
Yeah.
Tundra has just been redesigned for 2022 for the first time. It's had a complete redesign in close to 20 years.
Wow.
And the whole time the Tundra has been in production, or the previous generation of the Tundra, it's had one engine offering in the lineup, which is fine because it was a
Right.
good engine. But it
Right.
was a V8
V8.
that it
Yeah.
was quite capable and very reliable.
Yes.
With the 22 Tundra, there is no V8 option. They've gone
Really?
completely with sixes.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. My understanding now is the Tacoma production will shift entirely to Mexico, and the plant in San Antonio will handle the new lines of the Tundra. Is that correct?
Yeah, they're expecting quite strong demand, and from what I've read and seen so far, it seems to be that they called that one correctly. But the thing about switching from V8s to V6s, keep in mind that people who buy pickup trucks often are buying far more capability than they really need for their yard
That's an
cleaning or pulling a
understatement.
small boat or whatever it is.
That's an
Yeah,
understatement.
yes, it is. Well, I'm trying to be sensitive to the marketplace, but and there's you see the ads on TV of trucks pounding across deserts and trucks pulling giant backhoes up interstate highways and stuff like that. Capability is a big part of the sales pitch, and that's a big part of people want bragging rights, even if they're never going to use that
Right.
capability. And to that end, the manufacturers are very sensitive to maintaining that image
Okay.
and not disappointing these buyers. And so you will see that the six-cylinder Tacoma actually has just as much, if not more, towing capability, torque, and horsepower as the V8
Really?
engine, while
Wow.
providing better fuel economy.
So, I mean, do you
Yeah,
see a
they
transition? Go ahead, Jim.
no, they're certainly not going to give up any capability, nor will their buyers. It is part of the switch to smaller
Yeah.
engines or more efficient engines.
Do you see, I mean, the trend away from V8 engines entirely? Is that where the shift is coming? And at some point down the road, are we looking at four-cylinder engines?
Yeah, we're looking at them even now. It is it's inevitable that the V8 is just a kind of a dinosaur at this point.
Yeah.
Both in cars and in trucks.
Wow.
I don't think it's going to happen overnight, but
Right.
look at the variety of powertrains that F-150 is available with, and the same thing is happening with General Motors and with FCA, Chrysler, and the Ram trucks. We're still seeing some diesels, but we're also just seeing perfectly capable six-cylinder engines with turbocharging from all of them.
Yeah.
And that's going to continue. Four cylinders, who knows? It's all about maintaining capability, at least at this point, while
Right.
providing a more efficient platform and better fuel economy.
Right. Right. Speaking of fuel economy, the Cybertruck. We'd be remiss if we didn't touch on that. What are your thoughts on the Cybertruck?
I will be interested to see one when it comes to fruition. It certainly is an interesting looking truck. It's
It
created a
sure is.
tremendous amount of buzz for Tesla.
Right. Right. Right.
And um, it'll be interesting to see what kind of buyer acceptance it faces. Going back to
Sure.
the loyalty thing,
Right.
the Cybertruck obviously looks like nothing on the planet, and it is like no other truck on the planet at this point. I think it's fair to say.
Yeah.
But will somebody who's on their eighth or 10th F-150 trade it on a Cybertruck overnight? Probably not. Will it be a
No. It
success? Could be. With all the buzz.
right.
Once it makes it to the marketplace. But I
And
think
when
buyer
is that
loyalty
expected to
with
be?
pickups is going to, at this point, I don't even know the exact launch date. I think it has changed a number of times, and
Yeah.
Tesla is not necessarily the company with the most forthcoming PR folks for
Right.
those of us in the
Right.
car writing biz. Uh, we'll see. I mean,
Is
I've
it
heard in the next year or so.
next year or so? Okay. I mean, my next question was: is it really just kind of a concept piece? But it sounds like it's going to become a reality fairly soon. And when you say the next year, is that
You know,
product?
yeah, yeah, next year or so is something I've heard. I mean, Look, it has been delayed, but it doesn't seem like it's makes good business sense to bet against Mr. Musk. He has a tendency to, deliver on
Yes.
some pretty ambitious projects,
True.
to
True.
say the least. When the Tesla automobiles first started coming into the marketplace, there was a lot of naysaying about that. And not only was he able to, or was Tesla, the company, able to produce some of the first viable electric cars with a really good range and taking care of a lot of the arguments that people had against electrics. They changed the whole distribution model. They changed everything.
Yeah.
And they've been successful at it. So I would suspect we will see the truck when the time is right.
All right. Yeah, and in terms of electric vehicles and trying to get the infrastructure together, my understanding is that Tesla has one charging apparatus, and the other vehicle manufacturers have a different one. Is that correct?
Yeah, there's not a lot of standardization in the types of plugs that cars use and
Okay.
that sort of thing. Um, and that too is kind of an obstacle. But Tesla has done certainly a good job of rolling out a nationwide network of places to do charging. There's
Okay.
been lots of people have driven Teslas across the country, and I've got a friend who has is based both in Denver and in Florida, and he drives it back and forth in his
Oh,
Tesla
really?
all the time.
Okay.
He loves it.
Okay. Yeah, I mean,
He's,
I kind of look at the range as almost like a red herring in that, I mean, who's driving 300 miles in a given day? I might do it, let's
mm-hmm,
say, twice a year. For most people,
mm-hmm.
uh, they're driving 20 miles a day, even if you're driving back and forth to work. I mean, do you see the range improving? Is it an improvement that really needs to happen, or is it more a shift in people's thought processes and the way they approach things?
Yeah, it's a combination. People's thought processes are certainly a part of it. When you're driving a gasoline powered car and you get down to a quarter of a tank of fuel, you're probably in most parts of the country within, what, 10 minutes of a gas station, if
Right,
that. With an electric vehicle, you don't have that luxury in many parts of the country. So it's
right,
more of a concern. It involves more thought and planning. And people just don't want to have to deal with that. They,
yeah,
they want to know that they can just keep going. And then there's also the question of how long it takes to charge a car. Even with a
right,
fast charger, it's nowhere near as quick as filling a gas tank. And I think that's got something to do
right,
with the acceptance. Regional factors, there are more electric car charging stations in California and in the greater New York metropolitan area than there are certainly in the wilds of Montana.
fair
So
enough.
there's regional considerations as well. But it's changing. It will change over time, and there's a new generation of buyers who's grown up on electric cars. That will
Right.
be a contributing factor as well.
So, getting back to the world of internal combustion engines, what are your thoughts on diesel versus gasoline trucks?
There's a lot of diesel certainly provides better fuel economy than a gas engine in most applications, and the
Okay.
engines can be quite robust and last a good long time. But there's downsides to diesel. The stink is one thing that's certainly been dealt with a lot. The modern diesels are a lot less stinky than they used to be. The cost of diesel is now as bad as gasoline is. Diesel is even more out of sight, which kind of negates some of the appeal for passenger vehicles and lighter trucks. And I there's emissions concerns. There's the whole issue that Volkswagen and FCA in the past have been implicated in some cheating
Sure.
scams, I guess, for
Right.
lack of a better word,
Yeah.
on emissions considerations. And Europe is moving away from diesels. Diesel has been hugely popular in Europe for a very long time. But even Europe is moving away from diesel because of the pollution considerations and the
Okay.
health concerns.
Right.
In addition to all of that, a diesel engine carries a price premium over a gasoline engine, certainly at least in the US and the pickup
Okay.
market. So
Right.
between the price premium that you pay for a diesel and the added cost of the diesel, the payback, it's either a longer payback than it used to be, or it's just not worth it, period. So I
Right.
don't think
Okay.
we'll see a lot more proliferation of diesel in the passenger car market in the States,
What
or passenger truck or light truck.
So you've driven a lot of vehicles, a lot of trucks. What are some of your favorites? Is the F-150 up there? What do you think? What stands out to you?
I am a bit of a fan of trucks, and certainly, like many of my country persons, the F-150 is kind of a favorite.
Yeah.
But it depends on what your needs are too, to some degree, and what your priorities are. A lot of reviewers have noted that FCA with the Ram trucks, their interiors are gorgeous. They tend to
Okay.
ride better than their counterparts from GM or Ford.
Okay.
And that, if primarily for people who are using a truck for daily transportation, dropping the kids at school and running around doing that sort of thing rather than being at the job site, a better riding pickup that's more comfortable over bumps has a certain amount of appeal.
Yeah.
An interior that's more like a car with padded surfaces and leather and all of that good stuff,
Right.
nicely put together, that has appeal.
Right.
So there's that. In terms of sheer capability, they're all more than capable
Right.
enough for most
Right.
people's needs.
Right.
It
Right.
kind of comes down to brand loyalty a lot.
Okay. Yeah, that's good to know. And speaking of really plush interiors, I just wanted to run through some of the one-offs in the pickup truck, the history of pickup trucks. First of which that comes to mind is the Cadillac Escalade X EXT, the cross between the luxury pickup truck. What are your thoughts on that?
Sure. I think kind of the marketplace spoke for itself, right? I
I
mean,
guess.
they enjoyed a certain amount of popularity, but with the interiors of the GMC Denali and the higher end Chevys, really there wasn't a whole lot of differentiation to set the Escalade apart for the extra cost,
Right. Right.
and perhaps in terms of drivers, maybe pickup truck drivers and Cadillac buyers are kind of two different groups, and
Yeah. Yeah.
the
I
bragging rights maybe just
didn't work. I
didn't
remember it.
apply as much.
And I think the demographic, and I don't know if this had come from Cadillac, but the demographic I remember reading was guys whose father started a construction company. And I just don't know if there's a large enough buyer base for those sort of.
Yeah, I don't know that in a country of 350 million people, that's enough to support
Right,
a whole
right.
car line of people. And as you may be aware, Lincoln did the same thing with the Blackwood,
Okay. Yes. Yes.
which
Yes.
was an even sort of stranger approach. The Blackwood, at least the early ones, some of them had carpeting in the bed for
Okay.
whatever reason. An additional luxury touch that did not go well, particularly with manure or gravel or
Right.
whatever
Right.
work truck type things you might have in mind. And so the Blackwood was not too much of a success either, and ended up disappearing after a few years
Right.
with its wood grain paneling and everything on the outside.
And then Mercedes did a pickup truck, did it not? The X class.
There have been some coach built Mercedes pickups. There's the Unimog. There have been various pickup truck like things coming out of Mercedes, but I am not aware of a full on traditional pickup truck, at
Okay.
least in the U.S.
Okay. Um, and I drive a Subaru myself, so I'm just going to preface this by saying that I love Subarus, but in terms of some of the least favorite pickup trucks out there, Subaru really kind of takes the lead. The Subaru Brat, the Baja. Can you talk a little bit about those? Neither of which did very well and have been long since discontinued.
Yeah, well, they've actually attained a certain cult following and collector
Right.
status,
Really? Okay.
like so many discontinued. Well, sure, there are Subaru fans who kind of, appreciate all the Subaru virtues of
Right.
all-wheel drive and durability and a certain amount of off-road capability, and so it kind of made a certain amount of sense to do the Brat and the Baja. But were they super capable pickups? No, they were more like fun vehicles that you
Right.
could carry something in the back of. Or they also had these plastic chairs in the back to kind of get around what was called the chicken tax. Um, that was applied to trucks, that not necessarily applied to cars, and
Okay.
so a lot of those ended up getting left at the dump. But they're basically good vehicles with traditional Subaru values, and kind of more
Right.
like a Subaru version of an El Camino or a
Right.
Ranchero, but
Right.
ultimately not successful enough in the marketplace to justify their continued existence.
Right.
But they definitely have a strong following now.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. I mean, it's been a while. I think the iconic, if you could say that, Baja would be the yellow Baja, the yellow Subaru Baja. You don't really see
Sure.
them very often, but if there is a demand, on the collector's market, I could certainly see it. 90s are in again.
Yeah, when I was at Consumer Reports, we tested a yellow Baja. It's funny you mentioned that, and one of the employees liked it so much he ended up buying it, and it was around the
Really?
parking lot for years.
Wow. Okay. All right. Hard to miss those cars. I prefer, particularly when you're dealing with state troopers. You're a sitting duck when you're driving any yellow car, particularly a Subaru
Yeah,
Baja. It's kind of hard to blend into the crowd. You've got
draws
a gray
attention to
Honda.
yourself.
Well,
Not so
one of
much.
the wanted to thank you for joining us. And before we leave, speaking on your career at Consumer Reports, I wanted to get your advice for buying cars, trucks, whatever it may be. What are things to look for? What are things to look out for? And I'll just start with, I know, buying the first model year of a make of a car is not considered the best thing. And I bought the inaugural edition of the Subaru Ascent back in 2019, and it's been a great affordable SUV for my family. But it's had a number of recalls. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Hmm. Sure, that old adage still holds true, perhaps not as much as it used to. The
Okay.
quality of all vehicles has increased dramatically
Yeah.
over, the bad old days of the 60s and 70s, where, again, going back to Consumer Reports, every test car had a whole list of things that they would publish that were wrong with it. And we're not talking minor things. I
Wow.
remember once reading something about a Ford Maverick, the old Maverick economy car that had, a bolt missing from its steering mechanism, that
Oh,
kind of
wow.
thing.
Wow.
Not to pick on Ford, everybody else was in the same boat.
Right.
You just don't get that kind of build standard anymore.
Right.
But that said, yes, it is probably better ultimately to buy something that's been on the market for a year or two. It's also, I would add that right now is not a particularly good time to buy a car with the ongoing shortages of microchips and,
Right.
not enough supply for the demand. You'd be paying a premium. So that if you can wait, probably they're saying within the year, by the end of 22, the supply
Okay.
should start to open up again. And that will, of
Right.
course, make the marketplace more competitive.
Okay.
The other thing that as a buyer, if you don't have to have a new model at all, it still makes sense to buy a used car 2 or 3 years old
Okay.
that someone else has taken the depreciation hit on.
Right.
Because
Okay.
most cars lose between 30 and 40, some luxury models maybe even 50% of their value over 2 to 3 years. So
Wow.
if you can stand to not have the latest and greatest, that often makes sense. And with the durability and reliability of modern cars, the whole another old thing about a car not being any good after 50,000 miles, that just doesn't apply
Right.
anymore.
No,
Most
that's
anything with proper maintenance will go 200,000 miles.
which is incredible, which is really incredible. And I guess that leads me to my last question. I mentioned earlier I had an S10. It was a 1988 Chevy S10. Bought it in New Orleans, and I could work on that car myself, and it was as basic of a car as as steering wheel, bench seats, and a cassette player. I mean, it was as basic as they got. Do you worry that, particularly for Americans on the lower income bracket that are being passed down cars that are 10 and 15 years old, that it's going to become prohibitively expensive to fix these cars, and that they have all these computer systems? How does that work for the secondary market?
That's a very good question. I mean, it's not so much a question of reliability of most cars because most anything, again, is way more reliable than it was, 30 years ago.
Right.
But there's going to come a time where, with so many new cars out there, not everything is going to be supported in terms of spare parts. I
Yeah.
mean, I've
Right.
got a 66 Buick in the garage out here that is my summer car, and it is completely Stone Age. There's not a microchip in the thing
Right.
anywhere,
Right.
and largely because of its simplicity, it is still relatively easy and relatively inexpensive to get most parts for it.
Right.
And that combined with the fact that they made gazillions of them and there was a lot of parts interchangeability with a lot of other cars. If you're driving something like a 10 or 15-year-old higher end luxury car or, an import of some sort, there will come a time where you're just not going to be able to get parts and upgrades for it, particularly on the
Yeah.
electronics side. And, that's a danger. I mean, if you're looking for something or a potential cost, if you're looking for something really to last a long time, the simpler you can go with, the better. And the more
Right.
mass market you can go with, the better.
I see.
Odds
Yeah.
are a 15-year-old Honda Accord or even an F 150 to keep it to trucks, is going to be a lot more easy to find parts and mechanics who can work on it
Right.
and that kind of thing than a high end Mercedes SUV
Yeah.
that will be harder to find support for 15 years down the line.
To wrap it up on the F-150, which is, as you said, the top selling pickup truck in the country, do you see it maintaining its market lead? Where do you see Ford doing with the F-150?
Ford spends a whole lot of time and resources on maintaining that position and that image in the marketplace. And who
Right.
knows what'll happen down the line? Obviously, there's a huge fan base now that will continue both on the private and the commercial side. It's been interesting to see, the moves that Ford has made over even the past 10 or 15 years, like going to an aluminum body, for example. There were
Okay.
naysayers at that time,
Right.
aluminum saving several hundred pounds over an old steel body.
Yeah,
Now
for
it's nobody
sure.
even talks about it. It's just a given, and now we're seeing the
Right.
same sort of evolution with hybrid and electric power in the pickup truck scene. So it's
Okay.
clearly their market research people are working very hard to maintain their existing base while trying to attract new buyers with innovation and whatnot. And who knows? It remains to be seen.
Yeah.
I
Well,
don't
great.
imagine it's a mantle that they're going to give up easily or
No,
likely to
no,
lose anytime real soon.
no. Well, thank you for joining us, Jim. Are there? How can people read up? Where can they find you? How can they hear more about you?
About me, you know, I write a lot for cars.com and US News. Just check their websites and do a little Google, and you can find all kinds of ramblings
All right. All right.
and that
Well,
kind of stuff.
excellent. Well, Jim, it's been great to have you. Great to talk trucks, and everybody keep driving and stay safe out there.